Osiris.
Coming at you May 3rd, 2024. It's the inaugural record release from Discograffiti. Metal Machine Musac is a slanted tribute to Lou Reed's divisive 1975 double LP Metal Machine Music. Lester Bangs called it the greatest album ever made, but no matter how it hits you, it's always been the ultimate music freak's secret handshake. My ambient reimagining features 4 16-minute 1-second tracks, just like the original, and each one was created by a top-shelf indie rock visionary. Lou Barlow from Dinosaur Jr. and Sebadoh, Corey Hansen from Wand, W. Cullen Hart from the Olivia Tremor Control, and Mark Robinson from Unrest. That's right, not a slouch in the bunch, unlike 99% of the compilations you've ever begrudgingly purchased for the one and only band on it you just had to hear. Metal Machine Musac won't be available on streaming. The digital drops on May 3rd. The vinyl will be shipped this summer, and we're taking pre-orders for both right now. The LPs are going fast. They're being produced in a very limited edition run of 300 numbered 180-gram color vinyl double LP gatefold copies, only 100 of which can be ordered online. These copies will be numbered from 1 to 100, and they're first come, first served. To order, just go to patreon.com/discograffiti, then head into our shop. Again, that's patreon.com/discograffiti. Don't miss out on Metal Machine Musac, the ambient experience designed to make Brian Eno run screaming.
Well, when you got to know Dennis, he went on and on and on and on about James Dean all the time. And I just think that it's very likely that they had a relationship together. And he got such a big head from Easy Rider, and he was doing a lot of coke. He was doing a lot of drinking, and he was going crazy. And he finally did go crazy. And I ran for the hills.
Welcome to Discograffiti, the Music Obsessives podcast that gives freaks like you and me the chance to connect with a brotherhood obsessed with rating the entire discography of every single artist and band that ever mattered. I'm your host, Dave Gebrow, and with 3 to 4 episodes each week, you're going to gain a comprehensive knowledge of an act's history and output in the time it takes to listen to one album. Each new guest swings a hard left into an area you either had no idea you needed to know about or know all about and can't believe you're not alone out there. I am thrilled to announce that we have partnered with the podcast network Osiris Media, the leading storyteller in music. You can check out all their music podcasts at osirispod.com. And in this episode, we'll be turning our spray cans on the Mamas and the Papas, along with our unbelievably special guests, band biographer Richard Campbell, who's published an amazing bio, almost like a prequel really, called Gettin' Kinda Itchy, and Be Still My Beating Heart, the absolutely radiant goddess herself, Michelle Phillips, who'll be sifting through the sacred transmissions issued forth from her younger self and rating them all, every last LP and single, from 0 to 5 stars. This is part 5 of an epic new series called From a 16-Hour Interview, called Michelle Phillips, The Interview of a Lifetime, in which Michelle looks back with shockingly raw candor at a life exquisitely well lived. In part 5, Michelle burrows headfirst into some seriously traumatic territory, namely the time John Phillips saved her from being murdered, the 2 horrifying images she pictures whenever she thinks of the sessions for the Mamas and the Papas' final LP, People Like Us, and a frank discussion of her most forbidden topic, her 8-day marriage to Dennis Hopper. Before we kick things off, just a quick word from Michelle.
Hey, lads and ladies. Michelle Phillips here from the Mamas and the Papas. If you're like me and you want it all, then why in the world would you settle for a trimmed down version of my interview? To get access to the extended director's cut of this and all future episodes, just join Discograffiti's Patreon. Dave Gabbro's been singing for his supper for over 2 years now. The guy puts out several shows a week, and it's just the best music podcast of all time. You're not going to want to miss a single minute of it. Patreon.com/Discograffiti. Do it.
If you're a Michelle Phillips and Mamas and the Papas superfan like me, you'll want to turn this free version off right now and opt for the ultimate director's cut of this episode on our Patreon page, which features a whopping 29 additional minutes of essential material. And you can find it in our Patreon record shop for mere pennies at patreon.com/discograffiti/shop. Or just subscribe for the complete versions of all our shows. Even if you're on the fence, just head over there because it's finally free to become a basic member. I'm going to take this opportunity now to give a shout out to brand new Patreon member Tyler Davis, an 18-year-old young man with great taste and a soft spot for the Mamas and the Papas, who literally canceled his cable TV and subscribed to Discograffiti at the Brigadier General tier, which is $40 a month. Trust me, if he can find a way, so can you. Tyler, I love you, and you are seriously my hero. Okay, first things first, you need to know just how seriously I take this craziness. Discograffiti is a music obsessive's dream come true. The guest and I explore an artist or band's entire discography in a futile but valiant attempt to reach a higher truth, which often is cleverly disguised as a nerdy compendium of star ratings and lists. The show is heavily researched, and the music is always reassessed with fresh ears. We don't just cover albums. We do a searingly honest deep dive analysis of all EPs, singles, comp tracks, relevant solo work, and sometimes even bootlegs and live stuff. Every release is slapped with an objectively accurate star rating between 0 and 5, which allows us all, the real reason we do this, the Tootsie Pop reward at the center of the rock and roll lolly, to come face to face with the true shape of an artist's overall arc. Coming up, we've got Robert Schneider rating the Strawberry Alarm Clock, the Lemon Twigs, and the 3 surviving Dedrick siblings rating everything they ever released as one of the greatest bands of all time, bar none, The Free Design. Not to mention tons more Michelle Phillips, so don't miss out. Open up your listening app right now and subscribe. And away we go then! When we last left off, our intrepid hero had just seen that her house had not burned down.
In Malibu. They were renting a house in Malibu. This was when they were really in pretty bad shape.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They just abandoned the house and they went to New York. And they, in fact, left the door unlocked. There were people going in there and using the house, and they burned the house down. I think it was accidental. But when I heard that the house was open, I went down there and I found our poor little Grammy sitting on the mantle, all charred. And I just thought, John shouldn't have this. You know, he doesn't really care. And that it wasn't taken because nobody who would be breaking into houses in Malibu would even know what a Grammy was.
You know, I have a strange question to ask you. So your life has been so exciting in so many ways. It almost feels like looking back, you know, life is messy. So at 51, I can look back and see the big mess I've made in my life. But you have had such an exciting life that I almost feel like looking back on it, it's like looking back on a book that you read about somebody's life because it seems impossibly exciting. Do you have an almost detached feeling about all these things you've experienced?
Well, I've experienced a lot of really good things, but I've also experienced a lot of really bad things. And that's life. Someone attempted to murder me when I was 19 years old. I assumed that he was going to rape me. I almost passed out, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw John come around the corner, and I had knocked over a lamp. And he came around the corner, and he just went, ah! And he jumped on top of this guy, and he just started beating him. And I, to the point where I actually felt sorry for the guy. And John is saying, open the damn door, Michelle. because we were in a hotel when this happened.
Journeyman days.
Journeyman days,
Yeah.
yes. It was before we were married.
Did you feel like he was going to kill you?
Yes. He had knocked me down to the floor and he was kind of straddling me and choking me, and I was losing consciousness. And all I could think about was the fact that we had been playing with the Kingston Trio the night before, and we were all singing and playing. And I remember somebody saying, "Isn't it great that this hotel is so soundproof?" Because when he pushed me into the room, I did go, "Ah," like that. And when I was on the floor, that's all I could think about was, yeah, that's soundproof, all right.
Yeah.
And then John said, "Open the door." And John was nude because he was getting ready to get into the shower. So I opened the door, and John struggled with this guy who was the most conservative looking guy you could imagine. He had on a suit and tie and almost like a buzz cut. And John got him outside, and it was about 7 o'clock at night in the summer. It was still light out. And there were about 50 people sitting down by the pool. John struggled with this guy, and finally the guy got away and started running down the breezeway. And when the police interviewed the people by the pool, they said, "Why didn't you come to Mr. Phillips's aid?" And they said, "Well, we thought he was the intruder because he was nude." But, you know, those kind of things stick with you for the rest of your life. That kind of trauma sticks with you.
Of course, as human beings, we know nothing. So, we're pawns in some crazy being's game, potentially. But there is a world in which you needed him to save your life, and then you spent however many years having to repay the favor with all the crap you went through, right?
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, I went through different stages of John's existence. When I first met him, he was the collegiate, a real straight arrow.
Almost impossibly so if you look at pictures of him.
Yes, right.
It almost seems like this is a creation from AI of a square from 1962.
Right.
We're going to dive in to people like us where he looks like the smelliest, most unkempt, the opposite of that, basically.
Right. Well, having known John when I first met him and have him be that straight arrow, straight shooter, I always loved that part of John so much. And he was so creative and intelligent and funny. And I was always waiting to see if that would come back. But I was kind of just thinking that maybe he would stop doing drugs and maybe he would stop being a junkie. Unfortunately, it just turned him around completely.
Was there one specific moment where you realized that 1962 Journeyman guy's not coming back ever again?
Yes. When John attacked me.
Was that 1971?
It was earlier than that, wasn't it?
It was more like 68.
Okay.
And then I had to run for my life. I didn't recognize that person. And, there was definitely a part of John that wanted to make me suffer because really, I didn't want to be married to John anymore. I was starting to see a side of him that I really disliked. And, it took me a while to stop seeing him altogether because China loved him so much. All she wanted to do was be with her daddy. She adored John. And John was great with China.
But also Dunhill wanted the two of you back in the same room. So I'm guessing that it was hard to make a clean break, until at least people like us was over with, right?
Well, I think it was during Deliver that we had to redo our contract. And, John and I had come back together after I had been thrown out of the group. But John would not let me go to the meetings because he said, "Well, you always make Hal Landers."
Yes, that's right.
You always make him so mad. He was an owner of Dunhill. So I wasn't allowed to go to the meetings, but they wanted, of course, I had to go down to the last meeting to sign the contracts. And I had never read a contract before. I always just signed whenever, John put a pen in my hand. And for some reason, I just thought, no, I'm going to read this contract. And I got to a part of the contract that said that if the Mamas and the Papas ever did break up, that John could use the name Papa John, Denny could use the name Papa Denny, Cass could use Mama Cass, but Michelle could not use Mama Michelle.
Oh my God.
And this was a contract that was negotiated by John and Lou. I hate to say that, Lou, but you did this.
Was that the only time that Lou ever crossed you?
I think that Lou just thought, we're never going to get this contract signed unless I allow this to happen, because Hal wanted to get back at me. I just said, what is this? And Abe Summer was in the room too, of course. He was our attorney and Dunhill's attorney. He was everybody's attorney. And I said, what the hell is this? Hal just looked at me and he closed his briefcase and he got up and he walked away. And Abe ran after him saying, wait, let's talk about this. And I ran out and I heard Hal say, I'm leaving because she looked at me like I was a piece of shit. And then I was right up next to him and I said, but that's because you are a piece of shit. So they took it out. I was always encountering this. It was John, Cass, and Denny, and Michelle.
Yeah, but here's the thing. You handed the philanderer's ass to him, which is something a philanderer can never get over and will spend the rest of his life trying to right that wrong and even out the playing field. The power and control games that were going on in your relationship, I have to take a shot in the dark here and think that this is just an extension of everything you'd been through in the 60s.
Yeah, well, John really did go after me when I left, when I finally got the nerve to walk out the door. And I knew I was leaving everything behind. I was leaving 783 Bel Air Road behind. I was leaving all our investments.
Was he imploring you to come back? I mean, he must have been still totally in love with you. And in my mind's eye, that's what I'm imagining.
Well, by the time I left, the group had already broken up. But when I left, John emptied our bank accounts so that I couldn't even write a $5 check. And I just remember looking back at the house and thinking, everything that I worked for is back there. And from here on in, I'm going to have to be my own boss. I'm going to have to make my own career. I'm going to have to learn a whole new job.
Notwithstanding people like us, which we'll get to momentarily, how long would you say from you looking back at that house and having that realization to you feeling like I'm on steady ground and I've set myself up in a new life and no looking back? How long of a process was that for you?
It was about 6 years. I took Jack Nicholson's advice. He said, you could be an actress, but you should really prepare yourself.
I'm not talking about career stuff. I'm talking about waking up in the morning and feeling like I'm on terra firma. I'm okay with myself. I have created this thriving new existence, not about career.
Oh, I felt alone. I was always used to being the kid and doing what everybody else told me to do. And it took me a long time to be accepted really as an actress. Even though the first movie I did, I was nominated for a Golden Globe, but it was really hard for me to get work because actors don't like it when singers want to be actors, and singers feel the same way about actors that want to sing.
Different now, but back then it was a real...
Yeah, I was going to say, especially back then. Michelle, when you left the house, did you have China with you? I mean, you walking out of the house with her in your arms?
By the time I really, really left, I had already rented a house in Malibu. And I think that was the last straw for John. He thought that he could smoke me out if he was controlling all the money, and I wouldn't be able to pay my rent. But I'm pretty independent, even when there was a lot of stress and a lot of problems. And, Cass and I had to mend our relationship, and Denny and I had to mend our relationship. And it was just a really awful time.
Did they at that time, did either Cass or Denny ever come to you when John is spiraling down. So I'm thinking 69, 70, maybe late 68, and say, he's really bad. This is really bad. Like we have, somebody needs to help him, or was it fairly hidden and only really known to you?
Well, Cass and I got very close. I have to say that there was a bond beyond the mamas and the papas that Cass and I had.
Did you get closer after the breakup?
Yes.
Okay.
And she had Owen, her little girl, and I had China. And there was, kind of a maternal thing that we both had. It was sweet. We became very, very close and very good friends. And she was happy that she was putting her own career together. Things had taken a major shift, and I had to work really, really hard.
But your filmography is crazy. I mean, it just keeps going and going. You put out, a handful of records, but man, do you have a lot of acting credits. So
I do have
a lot. And now here's where things would deviate. If you were on any other podcast, they would go from the papas and the mamas, do like a 5-second thing on people like us and move on. But man, does this era fascinate me. So you wrote the best description of this, although I think I like the record more than you. You said the album sounded like what it was, 4 people trying to avoid a lawsuit.
Yeah.
which is what it is. So yeah. Richard, talk to us, please, about the background for this thing being born.
Well, they all had pressure to record. So just to on our timeline, Dave, so 68, they finished Papas and Mamas and things really disintegrate. And Michelle talked to us about how hard things were recording that album. You need to know, Cass in 1968 and into 69 is at a pretty low point. That's like the Pick Dawson period. Michelle was a good friend to Cass at that point in time because she was in a dark place. I mean, her sister had to kick some of these people off the property. And I mean, she just was not surrounding herself with healthy people.
With some terrible, terrible people.
Terrible people, which probably contributed to a lot of things in her health. So that's going on. She's making solo records, but behind that are some not good things personally. And then Denny is sort of just spinning out. I mean, he comes back and does his own solo album, after people like us. But anyway, they're all sort of fragmented. And Michelle's talked about what's going on with her and John. But there is this pressure. You got another album. You got another album to do. You got another album to do.
Cass also was very sick. She had to have a nurse with her in the studio.
So Tam is born on March 14th, 1971. And right around this same time, the gang is getting back together on a regular basis to work on the record. The circumstances behind it, if I'm not mistaken, is that you would have been sued for $1 million if you didn't provide an album, right?
That's correct.
$1 million total. So each of you would have been responsible for $250,000.
Right. That's correct.
A lot of money back then.
You know what? There's all kinds of different ways for inspiration to take hold. One of them is actual inspiration. The other is threat of legal action. And to me, I think what came out of this is a hell of a lot more interesting than the circumstances would typically allow. I don't think it's your best record by any stretch of the imagination, but
no.
There's a lot of interesting stuff going on here. And there's aspects of it that branch out in a slightly different musical direction. Plus, there's a sadness about it.
I have a song that I wrote on it called I Want to Be a Star. And I had an agreement with them. They had heard it as I was writing it, and they said, that's really good. I said, help me write it. I'm not really good with melody, and I'm not really good. And John said, oh, we'll put down a track, and we'll all help you do it. Just put a vocal on it. We'll put some great backgrounds on it. We'll make it into a good song, a good record. And then they didn't.
Right.
And they put it on the album anyway. And I said, but it's not even finished. It embarrassed me. Mm. And I felt that was purposeful.
Oh, yeah. And I think that is very consistent with what he did with Cass's vocals, because he acknowledged that he went in and completely suppressed and buried her vocals, which is what everybody says about this record.
That's the takeaway for most people. It's where's Cass.
And she was sick at the time. But the remix that was done a couple of years ago pointed out, because whoever had access to that had the ability to bring upper vocals. And if you go back into the newspaper articles, he acknowledged to Cass that he had done that, and she could hear it on the playbacks. So that does not surprise me at all. He did that with Michelle as well, and obviously was in a not very good place when this was going on.
There was obviously a real mean streak coming out of John at that point.
It's the only entirely self-written and produced album you guys ever had. There's no covers. It's all John. And then oddly, I mean, when you listen to it, it's you and Denny. It's you and Denny, I'm hearing.
It's basically a 1971 New Journeyman album.
Right.
Yeah. Funny. Well, I was very disappointed in the album.
How often were the four of you in the same space recording vocals at the same time? Did it ever happen? To me, if you look back through the history of any great vocal group, where the whole thing goes to shit is when they start coming in and overdubbing, because you can't imitate people standing around a mic. And again, this is probably a comment that people who are not super fans would have. But for me, I lap up everything that you guys have done, but you can hear the difference. There's a muted aspect to the record that comes across in the vocals. There's a sleepy, exhausted feeling to the whole thing.
Also, we didn't have an engineer. I mean, John was the engineer, or I don't know who was the engineer. It was just total chaos.
Yeah.
And that's what it sounds like.
The first thing you think of when you think of those sessions, what's the first image you get when you think about it? Actually recording the record.
I remember John disappearing into the bathroom for 40 minutes at a time. And I remember Cass just, sitting there talking with her nurse.
What was the point of the nurse, Michelle? Just to make sure she didn't keel over?
Yeah, I guess so. But, she had a broken knee. She had to have a kneecap replaced or something. I mean, it was very painful. She was in a lot of pain. And she was probably doing a lot of pain medication. It just seemed like I hated going to the studio.
Hi, I'm Dave Gebrow. I threw my career as a licensed hearing instrument specialist in the trash, sold my house, and moved to the East Coast with my wife and 4-year-old son in order to focus on making the ultimate podcast for music obsessives thrive. Now I need your help. Although Discograffiti is rated in the top 2% of all podcasts globally, the economics of this thing are tricky. Becoming a member of Discograffiti's Patreon gives you access to over 100 more exclusive episodes. And moving forward now every Sunday for only $5 a month as a private first class, you get our new weekly show by and for Discograffiti's Patreon family, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast. If all you want to do is show some love, there's now finally a $1 tier. Don't miss out. Become a recruit and get your personalized backstage pass for $1. And for the cheapskates, homeless people, and all the bums sponging off mom and dad, don't care, just join. It's now completely free to join as a basic member, and it'll be the only place you'll be able to get our upcoming Lou Barlow, Corey Hansen, Mark Robinson, Will Hart comp, Metal Machine Musac, as well as the triple album rock opera Elf Harmony I created with Joe Kennedy, and the ability to purchase one-off Patreon episodes. That's it. Back to the show. Let's drop the needle on this sucker. I am a champion of this record. I've always liked it. It has its weak points for sure. But let's start with the title track, track 1, side 1. People Like Us, I think, is a masterpiece.
David, I actually love that song. That's the only thing I like on it. It's the only thing I like on the record.
The title track has these sitar and flute runs that I swear to Christ always made me feel that it was redolent of the Philly Soul playbook before Gamble and Huff even got going, really. So, what I'm trying to kind of get at is that, especially in comparison to the earlier records, it's a lazier outing, but there's still groundbreaking stuff in here.
You have to kind of make your peace with the fact that it's not the Wrecking Crew. This is a different sound. You're right. And I think you need to realize that when you're assessing the record.
But yet still all the things that do differ from it and that are sour when you realize the derivation of where all this particular creativity sprung forth from, the vocals feel narcotized and submerged and muted in a way that's actually always felt compelling and appealing to me. It's dark like the Papas and Mamas, but there's also now more of a lush warmth to it. I think because now he realizes it's commercial product. So he's trying to maybe give it that sheen. I'm not really sure, but it's a terrific song.
That's a really good song, but I'm looking at the album, and these are all songs, European Blue Boy, for instance. These are all influences of Genevieve, the people that she was hanging out with from Europe, because she had come from London, and that's when she met John.
You liked her, right? I mean, didn't you got on with her?
I was so grateful that she showed up,
right?
Because it just took so much pressure off me that, I wanted that relationship to go on, but they were crazy together.
But I've read that you actually did like her. I can understand take him off my hands, please and thank you. That I get. But did you have a good vibe from her or no?
Well, when I started hearing things about needles, I said, that's just impossible. John would never do that. And they said, well, Genevieve and all those people are shooting up. And actually, I did not believe it for a long time.
I'm going to say that track 2, Pacific Coast Highway, is one of my least favorite songs I've ever heard.
He was really scrambling.
That song is garbage. That's just boogie, like the most disposable kind of boogie woogie.
Yeah.
Garbage.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's really that easy to be creative. It wasn't for John anyway. It wasn't easy for him to be creative when he was loaded.
And also with that bedrock of inspiration, go make this album or you owe us $1 million, that can't be inspiring. So that being said, when I say these things like this is a terrible song, I'm keeping all that in mind. Snow Queen of Texas, what do you think?
Snow Queen of Texas. There is another example of John making reference to drugs. Snow Queen of Texas. I mean, we know that he's talking about cocaine there.
I think it's a decent song. It's not great, but it's still got those Philly soul kind of signifiers in there. But then there's 2 amazing songs in a row, I think. Shooting Star is intense. And I could be totally off here, but it feels to me like, and this is where John is such an interesting writer, is that he can have something that is so desperately self-denigratingly autobiographical in there. Unless I'm misreading it, it feels like he's talking about it's over. I had this incredible ride and now it's over. And I'm surprised, maybe it's a misread, but I'm surprised that I don't hear more people talking about this song. And then Step Out, to me, is as good as the title track.
Let me catch up with you. Pacific Coast Highway and Snow Queen of Texas, I'm with you all. I like Snow Queen of Texas maybe better. Both, again, if you listen to the remix and Cass is more audible, they take on more life. Shooting Star, to me, is an early disco song. It really should be given more credit because we're talking about 1971. And if you played with it a little bit, it's 1975, easy. It's an easy disco song.
Side 2 of this record, it's not quite as good. But side 1, except for Pacific Coast Highway, that's the only song I don't like on side 1. I think Snow Queen of Texas is okay, and Lady Genevieve is decent. But there's 3 great songs on side 1. All right. So do you remember Step Out?
No.
No? Okay.
I'll listen to it later on today.
I got to tell you, it was number 81 with a bullet.
That's good stuff.
It reached number 81, but it deserved a lot better than that, I think. All right. So side 2, I'm trying to dance around how to even bring this up because I don't want you to reach through the computer and punch me in the face. But Grasshopper, here, go ahead. Grasshopper was about an unmentionable man, isn't it? Or no? Is it about your marriage to him? Isn't Grasshopper about your marriage to Dennis?
No.
It's not. Okay.
Dave, I've been told this was about Mackenzie.
And I've always liked Blueberries for Breakfast. I know it's a sort of like a
breakfast, love in the afternoon.
Not bad for only having heard it twice. I like this song.
I didn't.
I think my favorite part of it is Cass. She talks during it.
And she laughs. Yeah,
it's a nice little piece. Let's be fair. It's not a great song, but I like the informal nature of this being your last song, and it's almost like an afterthought, but I don't know. I've always liked it.
It is happy, which is nice. I think Pearl is always weird because it's a tribute to Janis, but it's so obscure. It's just barely there. And it seems like it could have been more obvious and then maybe would have gotten more traction. I don't know.
I hate Pearl. The only thing I like about Pearl is that you can clearly hear Cass poking out.
Yeah.
So one last thing before I give my sort of mini review about the record. You actually did have not just an engineer, but 2 assistant engineers. The great Dave Hassinger, who did a lot of the early Stone stuff, Surrealistic Pillow, one of the great engineers that ever was, worked on this record. And you have the requisite Henry Diltz cover photo. It just didn't come together the way that the other records did. But I will say, and I almost never quote record reviews from the time, but Robert Christgau is worth quoting. It's not just that we've changed, so have they. John Phillips now reserves his inspiration for his solo LP Where His Heart Is, and overall, the level of simple effort is so sappy, it's startling, C-. Now, I still hear the spirit in the thing, but obviously it's taken a beating, and only a handful of years later, it's been nearly snuffed all out entirely. The record, I think, has got some incredibly sad stretches, but overall, I think it's actually really underrated and informed by a similar darkness as Papa's and Mama's, but with a sort of layabout Gamble and Huff lushness that was, I think, definitely a correct John Phillips production move. There's a theory to be explored here that this record threw off John's muse, because after this project, he had a hell of a time either completing projects, getting them released, or overlooking the need to even make them good. But I'll give this 4 stars.
He made a lot of enemies in New York. When he went to New York, I know that it was all about money. I know that he got people to give him money because he wasn't getting enough money to support his lifestyle that, was always very lavish on the outside anyway. And he had Mackenzie Phillips living with him, Genevieve and Tamerlane, and then little Bijou. I don't know if you know this, but little Bijou was delivered.
I know.
By Mackenzie and John.
Yeah.
Because they were afraid to take her to the hospital because she was so loaded on heroin. I mean, it's such an ugly, ugly, ugly thing, the whole story. And I believe that you're absolutely right. He saw it all just disappearing. He saw his talent disappearing. He saw his circumstances disappearing.
I'm guessing that you give this a lesser rating than I. I'm giving it 4 stars, which is pretty high. I've not seen a review of this record that goes in that sort of adulatory direction. What would you think between 0 and 5? Do you hate this album?
Yes, I hate it.
What do you give it?
A 0.
Okay. Oh, hi. I got to tell you about the next tier. As a lieutenant, you get an ad-free, substantially elongated director's cut of every episode. And you'll be getting the shows a few days earlier than the general populace, which is designed to make you feel even more special than you already are. And now back to our expertly crafted program. How about you, Richard?
So I'm with you. I think it's a 4, and I think it is going to increasingly impress. I see that with young people. I think it's because people love the group and they love anything they did.
Right.
I have a dream, a fantasy. It would be a beautiful thing to get Michelle and Lou, if Michelle could stomach it. After hearing her today, I don't know that she could, but I would love to put Michelle and Lou in a studio with the original tapes and let them work on it, because John screwed it up.
It's a great idea.
I think the raw material is there. Yeah. And I think John, screwed it. He screwed it to Cass. He screwed it to Michelle, we've heard today. He may have screwed it to others. He screwed it to the record company. But I think the raw material is there, that if you had a talented engineer, maybe you get somebody in addition to Lou and Michelle, let Lou and Michelle kind of give the yay or nay and let somebody really work with it. I think it would be fascinating. The thing about this album is that this is the one Mamas and Papas album that there are the actual tapes for. Now, somehow they're in the John Phillips estate or holdings, but that's how that remix got done a few years ago. It wasn't authorized. I know Michelle didn't bless it. I know Owen and Denny didn't bless it. but it was interesting to hear them bring out particularly Cass's voice. So I know the raw material is there, unlike the original albums. So anyway, that's a fantasy I have. I give it 4
Michelle,
stars.
You give
I
it 4?
can't tell you how much people continue to discover people like us, and they really love it. They really do.
My problem with it is that I think people expect a certain mood out of mamas and papas music because there's so much good, funny, happy, really musically wonderful things that's what's gone from people
That's
like
why it is so unfailingly interesting to me. And that's why I will, when I put the record on, always listen to the bad tracks too. It works as a piece because you get a sense of the history of what you guys were going through. And so a real fan of your music will be an apologist for the stuff that doesn't measure up. And I'm curious if what Richard said, if you could stomach going back and looking at this old material and righting all the wrongs that happened. Would you consider that?
No. I'm so over it.
Totally understood. Totally. The album tanked, and John, from his book, said, the solo album and People Like Us made me come to grips with the fact that I had lost the drive, the knack for writing top 40 songs. Now you're fully done as an integrated full unit. In other words, 1974, I know you guys without John got together and there were some iterations of different people getting together, but as a foursome, we're done now, right?
Yeah.
Were the People Like Us sessions the last time the 4 of you were all together? Do you know, Michelle? Were you all ever in the same place again after 71?
We must have been. Oh, yeah, I remember. Oh, no. Cass wasn't there.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
The last time that John, Denny, and I were together was the night before Cass's funeral. And John, of course, this is so John. This says it all. He got up to make a toast, and we're all wrapped in attention. And he said, well, Michelle, you said you'd bury us all. You start tomorrow morning.
Wow.
Yeah.
So do you have a final memory of the 4 of you in the same room, or did you never really consciously look back and think, when was the last time we all 4 were in the same room? You don't really have that recollection?
I don't have that recollection at all because everybody had gone their separate ways.
So as the 70s goes on, and Richard and I are going to do a very in-depth episode about all the solo careers, but John's is a very strange story, which we're going to tell in great detail. I mean, because even the stuff that doesn't get finished or where he's only peripherally involved, there's interesting stories behind it. But it was a rocky road for him, to put it mildly. So Cass and Denny remained friends after the band broke up. She asked him to marry her, but he declined. So notwithstanding acting, between 69 and Victim of Romance, talk to me about that stretch. And besides setting up another career and raising China, did you have time in your life for other goings on in that time?
Yeah.
What were you up to? Did you have a better 60s than you did 70s, or better 70s than you did 60s?
Well, I started going with Jack in 69.
Did you date Peter Fonda, by the way?
No, he wanted to, but I didn't have any interest in Peter.
So without actually thinking about actual events, do you have a fonder recollection of the 70s than you do the 60s?
Well, the 70s, they were great in a way because I was starting to work.
You were under the tutelage of a mad, crazed lunatic from when you were 18 to this moment. So it's almost like you put your own personal development, in a sense, on pause, and now you get to press play again, right?
Right.
What was that?
Well, it was the first time I had ever really lived alone, but I had China and our nanny, but it was great. I had a little house out in Malibu, and I felt free from the confines of marriage.
You didn't leave that relationship, I don't think, anyway, with a messed up idea of what marriage was, just what John was, right? I mean, because you still...
John was. Yeah. I was so used to being under John's tutelage that it was a wonderful experience for me to find myself in a situation where I could do anything I wanted. And if I saw a guy that I really liked, I would have a relationship with him.
Do you remember the first thing when you finally looked around, you were like, I'm free? Do you remember how you first celebrated that moment? Did you consciously celebrate that moment?
I remember driving out of Bel Air with China, her passport, and the Tiffany lamp. And as much as I was leaving, I had a real adventure ahead of me. I always was very adventurous, but now I was older and starting something on my own and having relationships that did not involve John, obviously. And it was like a rebirth for me, just so much fun. And then just out of the blue, I was cast in Dennis Hopper's movie because Lee Remick was supposed to do that part. And she pulled out 2 weeks before everyone was going down to Peru.
So I would say that most people on the planet have not seen the last movie, whereas most people on the planet have seen Easy Rider. So to give some background for people who are not familiar with it, it is kind of a very alienating, in a Brechtian kind of way, art film where it's a meta examination of filmmaking and reality. I think it's interesting. I've always liked the movie and the sheer what the fuck chutzpah of conquering the world, and then this is your next step artistically, is a real mind blower, and it takes guts to do something like that. But whoa, it's probably the strangest film that you've ever been in, right?
I thought I'd never work again. It's obviously written, directed, and produced by an egomaniac.
At the same time, the real movie, just like Fitzcarraldo, the real movie is Burden of Dreams. Apocalypse Now, the real movie is, there's a doc that explains everything Coppola was going through. American Dreamer is the real movie, I think. Because you see what's going on behind the scenes and you're like, oh, okay, so that explains the last movie.
I had never been on a set before. I hardly even knew when a camera was on or what was going on. I was just fascinated by being in Peru. And a lot of it was improvised. You know, a lot of the movie was improvised. I didn't have to do too much in the movie at all. I was just having a great time. And I was watching Dennis directing. I thought, so that's what a director does, you know? And I remember the day before I was supposed to leave on the plane with the entire cast, there was a small group left with the crew. And all of a sudden, Dennis, who had not really paid much attention to me at all during the whole filming, turned to me and he said, Michelle, would you mind staying for a few more days? I want to do a scene with you and Tony Basil. And I said, sure. And Peter Fonda was incensed. He said, you're not going to stay here, are you? And I said, my director asked me to stay a couple of more days and I'm not supposed to stay? Why would I not stay? He says, because all he wants to do is screw you. I said, that's not true. I think maybe he sees something here. I think maybe he sees some talent. And that night, Dennis and I did, in fact, start a relationship.
I thought you were going to say screw each other.
We did. But I saw in him, I think, a lot of the things that I saw in John. A very talented guy with a lot of energy, and he wanted to do everything, write it, direct it, you know, you do this and you do this. And I think I saw a lot of things that I admired about John, the way he kind of took the bull by the horns. And I loved that. And I came back to Los Angeles and Chris Christopherson called me and he said, listen, I have to do a concert in Lima and I want you to come down and sing with me and do the concert with me. And I thought that was a pretty good excuse for me to go back to the set. And we did a great concert together, by the way. And then it just started with Dennis, and it was very passionate. It was very new, but he was so involved in the film. You know, after I was there for a week or so, I came back. But that's when my relationship with Dennis started. But I should have seen a lot of red flags that I really was not seeing.
Like what?
His temper He was an egomaniac. It would come out in different ways. And also, everybody up there was doing coke because, of course, Peru being the coke capital of the world, then at least.
Do you have any use for that drug, or was it a turnoff for you?
You know what I did? I went to the cocoa leaf store and I bought some cocoa leaves. And then there's a stone that you kind of grind up and you chew on it. So I went to my hotel room and I was going to try this cocaine. So I started chewing and, my whole face eventually just went numb. And I thought, what's the thrill here? I don't get it. And everyone was laughing at me and they said, you were doing cocoa leaves? You're supposed to snort it. And actually, the first time I did, my nose hurt so much. And this was very good cocaine, apparently.
Was he doing it to a great extent, Dennis?
Yes, he was. Everybody was. All the guys up there had those brown pharmaceutical bottles full of cocaine.
It's called Merc. I think I've read that it's called.
Yeah. I think they called it Merc. But I have tried cocaine on occasion, but I never liked the jitteriness of the high. I never liked it. I'm a big pot smoker. I don't smoke pot anymore, but that's just because someone gave me a joint once that was laced with PCP or something. And that was the end of that.
I bet it was Sly Stone. So do you think that cocaine was at the root of why things got so demented so quickly with Dennis, or was it because of Dennis?
Well, Dennis had a very big career before he did Easy Rider. I mean, He was in Giant with Elizabeth Taylor, and he worked with Howard Hawks, and he did A Rebel Without a Cause. And, he was kind of a big star. But definitely his love of the combination of cocaine and scotch put him at another level, just in the same way that heroin put John on another level.
I know that when he was bad,
he was very, very bad.
I know that directors, when he was on set in the mid to late 70s, would schedule all his close-ups first. You've worked on a million sets. You start wide, you punch in to close-ups so you can break down the set and establish it somewhere else. With Dennis, it was the opposite. We have to get close as soon as possible and then back the fuck up as the day goes on, because you take one look at this guy's eyes, you know that he's not camera ready. So I'm sure it got worse. But also, this is a guy, when I look at him, I know nothing about him except being a fan, but I don't see a 1962 journeyman's innocuousness side to him.
Right. I didn't see his alcoholism until it started to affect our relationship and his attitude. He could get a real attitude. And then we came back, he'd finished, and now he bought the Maple Dodge Lujan house in Taos, and they were cutting it. They were cutting the movie there. That's when I started to see him doing cocaine and scotch. And I don't mean a scotch, I mean a bottle of scotch a day, at least. But I was mad for Dennis. He was, in his own way, he was a little genius, but he also had a lot of hang-ups. He was very hung up about his height. That's why he always wore boots with heels on them this big. He was practically in stilettos. And he always wore this Stetson hat. He had an inferiority complex. I think he was in love with James Dean.
Yeah, the big takeaway for me from everything I've read is that, he was kind of living under that shadow.
Yeah. And I honestly do not know this for sure, but I think that he was bi, and I think that he probably had an affair with James Dean. I can't say that for sure because I don't know, but that's what I've heard. Like, I don't want people to pass things on about me. I don't want to pass things on about Dennis.
I mean, I'm not even gay, and I would have sex with James Dean in a heartbeat.
Yeah. Well, when you got to know Dennis, he went on and on and on and on about James Dean all the time. And I just think that it's very likely that they had a relationship together. And he got such a big head from Easy Rider. and he was doing a lot of coke. He was doing a lot of drinking, and he was going crazy. And he finally did go crazy. And I ran for the hills.
What is it about you getting involved with people who are okay? Let me rephrase the question. I can think of no better person to ask who is an authority on this matter. Do you feel like to be a genius, you have to be that fucked up?
No.
No?
No, I don't. I mean, look at me.
Right. No. Seriously, you're an incredibly well-adjusted person. You know, I mean, that is clear. So it's amazing that this shit never rubbed off on you.
Let me tell you something. Even though I'd lost my mother when I was very young, I was 5 years old. I had a wonderful father, really, really smart, totally a no bullshit kind of guy. And
what did he say about Dennis? When you brought Dennis home for dinner and he looked in Dennis's eyes,
my father said, "You're out of your mind."
Did you bring him home to Dad?
I don't know if I took him to dinner, but my father met him and he said, "Michelle, don't do this. This is going to be very bad." But I was an adult. He could only give his advice. And I think that both John and Dennis Hopper both had very sad childhoods. And that makes all the difference in the world to have someone who can sit down with you and talk to you without yelling at you. And I always felt absolutely blessed to have my father.
So when you become a major, you'll be getting access to the ultimate director's cuts of all our sprawling, super deep dive episodes. As far as I'm concerned, these super cuts have absolutely everything that was meant to be heard. Plus, you get yours before the lieutenants get theirs. But that ain't it. You also get all our other series, like Discograffiti's Top 10, our Buried Treasure show, Rock Cousteau, our Slag Off show, Queasy Listening, and exclusive limited series like The Private Press with Paul Major. And if you've got no financial worries to speak of, keep in mind that some of the higher Patreon tiers allow you to actually advertise on the show, choose the bands we cover, or even some of the guests we get. For the price of a cup of coffee a week, you can ensure my family's fed, build a music library that'll be the envy of your block, and connect to a thriving community of music maniacs all at the same time. Don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not giving. Patreon.com/Discograffiti. Once again, that's Patreon.com/Discograffiti. So I'm curious if there was a day where you woke up and it hit you, holy shit, I'm a fixer of broken men. I got to stop doing this shit. What the fuck am I doing? When was that day, or did that day happen? Or is it happening right now?
Well, the fact is that really, really intelligent men are very interesting, and you can get very attached to them very easily. But I also know that I can have a perfectly fulfilling relationship with a sane man. I mean, Stephen was sane. We were together for 17 years. And before that, I was with Jeff for 12 years. And we had, for the most part, a very, very happy relationship. I can say...
Is there a part of you that almost started searching out boring relationships as an antidote to what you'd been through? Just boring guys who like to sit around doing jigsaw puzzles?
Yeah,
there's nothing about Michelle Phillips that's boring.
As an antidote.
Well, boring has never been my deal, as you know. And I had I can say this because everybody knows this, but I was with Jack for 2.5 years, but the chemistry was not there, although we're really good friends today. And then Warren, he's nuts, and I loved him very, very much, but he was too afraid of a real relationship. That's very common, guys who don't want to get into a serious situation. And I can understand with me why they wouldn't want to get into a really serious relationship, because I can do a lot of hurtful things too.
They must have been super scared of getting their hearts broken, actually. I don't care how famous you are. If you've heard any of the Mamas and Papas songs even once and bothered to listen to the lyrics, I'd be really watching my mouth in an argument.
Well, I have had my share of boyfriends, and I doubt that I'll really find someone in my lifetime that's the only time you have, honey.
Notwithstanding the Hindus.
Yeah. Well, I'm not religious, so.
Did China become incredibly enamored with Jesus Christ because of the tumult of the 70s?
Well, I'm her mother.
Right. I don't mean you. I mean, if anything, I would imagine that you were her buoy at all times. But because of who her dad was and, the tumultuousness of that, and I don't know what else, is that why Jesus Christ gives her as much comfort as he does?
China's relationship with her father was very sad because she loved John to death. And I don't think she ever really, really knew him when he was sober. And that was very hard on her. It was very hard on her. But we were always very close. And I tried to make her life as happy as I could. And I tried to encourage her. The last thing I wanted her to do was to get into the record business.
Well, he found solace with two women who went through very similar, maybe very different people, but certainly not very far away from. Yeah. So one more thing before we move on into the 70s is it's okay if I have to live the rest of my days thinking what I think, the secondhand hearsay that I've heard about why it is that you and Dennis split up as quickly as you did. But I'd love to know if, just like all these other rumors and factoids instead of the truth, I would hate to know every last thing about all the major events of your life and have this amoebic possible sense of what might have happened.
I don't know what you've heard, but I just don't talk about Dennis. If I had some wonderful memories, I'd tell you about them.
I had heard that he tried to put you in all these different sexual situations that were not cool at all.
That's not true at all.
Okay.
See,
okay.
And I know what you're talking about because, as you know, I have people saying things about me all the time. I was listening to someone being interviewed. No, it wasn't. He wasn't being interviewed. It was just something that's on your phone and it comes up. And I said, "What? Oh, it's about the mamas and the papas." And he says, Michelle and Dennis were married for 6 years and had a daughter. She's also known to be an avid hiker.
Go where you want to go.
This is what, and yeah, people are going to say, Michelle's an avid hiker. Didn't know that about her.
Look, the only reason I wanted to go there is because it turns out this is the best interview you've ever given in your entire life. And so I want to make sure that you have the opportunity to address it should you want to. That's all.
Well, thank you.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. Okay. So
now I need that glass of wine.
That was the whole point all along. Okay. So really the crux of this whole interview is this question, because we're in 1980 now. Who's better, the mamas and the papas or the new mamas and papas?
There is no new mamas and papas.
Okay, let's talk about the background behind this thing, because we're going to get to John's narcotic charges and things like that. But was this a real legitimate music thing, or was this him trying to impress the authorities that he was squeaky clean now, even though he was still drinking and doing coke?
Oh, well, I don't know what he was doing towards the end, but he wasn't sober. I know that I went to see, it was John and Scott and Spanky McFarland, and Mackenzie. And, I sat in the audience and I just started to weep. It was so awful. And it was so obvious that Mackenzie and John were on drugs. And as I said in a letter that I wrote to the newspaper, and I don't mean pot, and it made me so sad. I had to actually get up and make the French exit. I couldn't take it any longer. They were so awful. I felt very bad for Scott, and I felt very bad for Spanky because, they're good singers, but you can't get up on a stage with a bunch of drunks or drug addicts and expect to do a decent concert. It was just painful.
Plus, you got an early version of Kokomo kicking around, which is a very strange, that song is just a blight. If I could kill a song, I would kill that song. The CD that came out was very insultingly titled, Many Mamas, Many Papas. Like everyone's interchangeable.
Well, that's typically John.
Yeah. Although Scott, I know you were close with Scott, but looking over his recording career, it was probably the best thing that could have possibly happened to him because, just from a music fan's point of view, and I'm not nearly as familiar with Scott's work as I am with yours, he seems like a guy who'd been in search of a musical identity, a career identity for his entire life and never really got there.
He never wanted it. John gave him, if you go to San Francisco, it was for John that he gave it to Scott, but he also felt that he had to make something up to Scott because Scott did not end up in the Mamas and the Papas.
Right.
And I think he would have liked to have, but that's not the way it turned out.
Scott wasn't in it till the late 80s and 90s. And they were looking for people at that point in time. Mackenzie was out. Spanky was out. At one point in time, it was Scott and 3 other people.
Oh, that's rough.
Yeah.
So tell me about the books. Was California Dreamin' written in response to the idea that John was writing a book? And so you knew you had to? No, okay.
No, as a matter of fact, I went to all of them and I said, I want to write a book about the Mamas and the Papas. Does anybody have any objections? And everyone said, no, go ahead, do it, write it. John said this, Denny said it. Well, Cass had already passed away, but I talked to Owen, I talked to Cass's estate. I said, does anybody have any objections to me writing the book?
So was it John trying to hurry up and get to press before you did? Is that what happened? Because he heard...
It came out the same week.
Okay, so the book situation, the last 15 years that John was alive, was that sort of the ender that really drove a wedge between you guys? Or was that just another thing and just life goes on?
We were never friends again. I mean, when I went to see them, I had already gone backstage and told them I was in the audience and, I wished them luck. And there was no relationship there. And of course, he had been with Genevieve for a long time. And I never saw Tam again from the time they kidnapped him. I saw him once about 12 years ago. He came by with China.
Unexpectedly?
Yeah. And it was heartbreaking because you can see that Tamerlane was very, very affected by the way he was living and how sad it was. He's a great guy, but you can see the damage that was done to that child.
We didn't really touch too much on Cass's passing, if at all. Because I'm about to mention, John passed away in 2001, Denny in 2007, but these were probably very expected.
Not Denny.
Not Denny.
Not expected. He had been in the hospital. They were taking something off his lung, and while they were in surgery, they saw that he had something on his heart. They made the decision not to go in for it because it wasn't scheduled and they wanted to be better prepared. But Denny died just a few days later in his sleep, probably, I hope.
Here's the big question for me. This is a question really for me, but it's the big one for me. So at heart, I've always seen myself as kind of a post-60s hippie, born in 72. In 1985, I'm like 13 years old, watching Gimme Shelter, watching Woodstock, dreaming about freedom, permissiveness. But these are the concepts of a 13-year-old. They're simplified concepts without any notion of what permissiveness means or the toll that could take, things of that nature. And I wrote a screenplay that I talked with you about called Bad Vibes. That's about a 60s rock and roll band that turns into werewolves. But the real thing underneath it was really kind of based on a series of relationships. You with John, actually Graham Nash with David Crosby had to deal with somebody who's really off the rails, try to match them, try to back away.
Who did they have to deal with?
Well, Crosby was off the rails with coke and heroin. And Nash was his best friend, not really a lover, but I kind of took aspects of their relationship and turned it into a male-female thing in the film. And so in my film, what surprised me was that I came at it from the vantage point of somebody trying to extol the virtues of freedom and permissiveness. And when I walked away from it, I realized that I'm more traditional than I thought I was, because the theme of the film turned out to be a catalog of all the great things that got lost in a decade where permissiveness reigned supreme and steamrolled tons of great things that never were broken beneath a valid exploration of life's possibilities at that time. What's the greatest thing in your life that you believe you lost to the permissive possibilities of life in the 60s?
What did I lose?
Brothers Chris and Bruce and sister Sandy Dedrick and younger sister Ellen joined in 1968. Never seemed as simple as they were because of the music. Music was as soft and breezy, as antithetical to the times as it implies. Vocal parts swoop in and out and double back on one another. Dances over and around acoustic guitars in the mix. There's a harpsichord, bongos, tambourine, light bossa nova flavorings, folk, and even touches that told you these kids knew something about jazz.
We got jazz.
Are you more traditional than you thought at first?
I'm a very traditional kind of person. I was raised to be a good citizen. I have never been late for work, for instance. I have never been late for work in my life. Because when I was late, when I was a young kid, my father would dock my allowance. And before I would go out, he'd say, "What time are you coming home?" And I'd say, "How about 1 o'clock?" He'd say, "Okay, let's synchronize our watches."
So and you're still that traditional. It's because your dad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what wound up being steamrolled that you think about? Like, I wish that I could have brought that with me into this stage of my existence. Is there something that you have lingering thoughts about?
No, because I do everything I want to do. I travel. I just got back from a trip down the Danube on a river boat. I'm going to Spain, to Portugal on a riverboat. I just feel that I deserve it. I'm a good girl.
Yeah, you certainly are. You certainly do. Before we actually do our top 3 records, I want to ask you a final question about the group. There's a world in quantum mechanics, everything happens at all times. So because Fleetwood Mac did this, there's a world where the 4 of you stayed together regardless of the personal agony that your relationships caused you. In that world, is that the better world, or is it best that you imploded so quickly, reaching those supernova heights and then immediately flaring out almost as quickly?
I think the latter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would it have been like if you were like, you know what, this is too big a juggernaut to say goodbye to this. We got to stay in it no matter how much we hit each other.
Because we didn't feel that way about it. At a certain point, that big bubble did burst. And once it did, there was no point in trying to make junk like this. We had very high standards. And when those high standards were not met, then it was time to get out.
I think the right decision was made for sure. Here's my overview and shape of your arc, which is always the very final thing I do. Okay, so the self-destructive proto-Mac bed-hopping antics has a way of sometimes defocusing from the almost inconceivable accomplishments the 4 of you piled sky high in such an intensely brief period. A sense of great purpose and, very important here, a blind trust in fate's ability to guide you to your ultimate destination marks your early days. And what seemingly killed it was a total and complete textbook-style hedonism lived out in an almost inimitable way. Somehow the social experiment permissiveness that came with the 60s landed squarely on your 8 shoulders, which is a hell of a burden to have to carry. The dynamics may have left wounds that'll never heal, but if I may say so, the music is reward enough for your troubles, because if you strip all that baggage away, still to this day, for me, it's the blend of your 4 voices that composes the breeze which sweeps through Laurel Canyon on a magical Los Angeles evening.
You're so poetic.
It's really how I feel. And I guarantee you, I'm not the only one on this call who feels that way. Top 3 records. My number 3 is Papas and the Mamas. Number 2, If You Can Believe Your Eyes and Ears. And number 1, The Mamas and the Papas. Worst album, People Like Us.
Can I just choose one?
Sure. You can do whatever you want.
This album is the best album we ever did. It's the Mamas and Papas Greatest Hits. And that is a joy to listen to. And you don't have to keep saying, I like that song, okay, but not really. And you listen to the Mamas and Papas Greatest Hits, and it's just one damn great record after the next. And I'm so proud of it. You know, people don't have CDs anymore, but I still give them CDs. I say you can go down to the 99-cent store and buy an actual CD player. They're like $15.
But the funny thing is, okay, so I would say 99% of the artists who've been on this show, if you told them that the Greatest Hits was your favorite record, they'd want to punch you. You know, flying in the face of everything that's reverent about artistic integrity and the track order. And so I love that you're just like, I don't give a shit.
But the iteration that Michelle loves, I think, is one that was particularly curated decades after the group. It's not the Greatest Hits that comes out like the 16 greatest hits, you know, of the time.
To clarify to everyone at home, this is not Farewell to the First Golden Era.
No, or 16 Greatest Hits, which came out in 70, or A Gathering of Flowers. It has a picture of them live in concert on the front.
What's the exact title and the label, so that if people want to track down what your perfect vision of the Mamas and Papas is, they can go to it?
You know, most people don't play their own material, but I play the Mamas and Papas Greatest Hits all the time. It's right up there with Ricky Skaggs. My guy.
But isn't Ricky, that's your favorite album of all time, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, what's the name of the album again? You showed it to me. I forgot.
It's called Waiting for the Sun to Shine.
Okay, yeah.
It was 1998, and it's, as I said, curated well because it's got things like No Salt on Her Tail and Dancing Bear. It's got Glad to Be Unhappy. It's got Safe in My Garden. So
does it have For the Love of Ivy?
It doesn't have Ivy. And you all are way too unfair For the Love of Ivy.
I hate that song.
I know you do.
I hate it.
So do I get to get my 3?
Please, yes.
So I'm going to cheat because I have a tie for 3. Sorry. Deliver and Papas and Mamas. Maybe Deliver by a Sliver.
Hold on. Because these guys have 4 albums, basically, I'm not allowing you to do a tie.
Okay. Well, now that I've said it, Deliver by a Sliver, and then If You Can Believe Your Eyes and Ears, and then the Mamas and the Papas. Second album is number 1.
Okay, so, yeah. That's cool that we're in agreement on that, because I think most people, the first is probably their favorite.
Probably. And I guess People Like Us, I would take Papas and Mamas, I would rank it over People Like Us, but I feel like it gets kicked around as we've talked about tonight.
You know, the problem is that there's a standard that we created for our music, and you can't ignore that. You can't put a mediocre track in between 2 really good tracks.
It hurts.
It hurts deeply.
Because, meaning, so I can gauge almost like a VU meter, my experience with a record. All you got to do is just check in with how engaged and interested you are. It either grabs you and pulls you in, or you're able to do a number of other tasks while you're listening. And so, you know, when For the Love of Ivy comes on, or, you know, a couple other ones, mostly from, you know, People Like Us, I can do other stuff, but 98% of your music, I'm spellbound and cannot really do much of anything. It's kind of a blabbering mess.
You know what's interesting? There's something on, I think it's on YouTube. It's called I Saw Her Again Last Night, Vocals.
I sent it to you, I think.
You sent it to me?
Yeah.
I love that.
He strips out the instrumentation.
Richard, you should play it for David, because It's astounding because the vocals on I Saw Her Again are so much more interesting. I mean, you can see where John was tormenting us. He's saying, you're going to sing this part. And you go, what? What part? It's like we're singing, Gregorian chants or something,
Can I ask a quick question?
Mm-hmm.
I've been talking a lot to this other vocal group called The Free Design, and they were all jazz people. They were reading music. They had charts. Did you guys learn the parts by ear, or did you actually read music and have charts?
No, we didn't have any charts because nobody knew how to read music. I knew more about reading music than they did. I took piano for 2 years when I was 11 and 12, and I can pick something out if it's written in C, and that's about it.
Listen, we're going to move forward, so I'm not saying goodbye as far as in an episode form. I'll say we'll see you in the solo years, which is another episode we're going to do. But I want to say before we're out from this one, no matter how it lands, I love you. It's been such an amazing experience talking with you, getting to know the real person that you are. And it's really been just like that painting right behind you, a beam of light.
So what are you doing later?
I'm coming right.
Homewrecker.
Yes. We'll see you in the solo years. All right, that about does it. Stay tuned because we'll be back in mid-May with the predictably exciting conclusion of the Michelle Phillips Interview of a Lifetime series as we tackle Cass, Denny, Michelle, and John's solo careers. But don't go anywhere because next Friday begins a 2-week Metal Machine Musac extravaganza with 4 publicly available episodes a week for 2 straight weeks, featuring special guests Lou Barlow, Corey Hansen, Mark Robinson, and W. Cullen Hart. Week 1 is a conversation with each of the compilation artists on Lou Reed's original deafeningly assaultive double LP and what it's meant to them. And then week 2, we go in depth on the approach each of the 4 took toward their 16-minute pieces. A heartfelt Discograffiti thanks goes out to my beautiful wife and son, Jen and Mason, Michelle Phillips, Richard Campbell, Fernando Perdomo, Rudy Fishman, Becky Boyd, my incredibly loyal fans, and especially the entire Patreon community, the Soldiers of Sound. I love every last one of you, and this show would not exist without you, my friends. Speaking of friends, it's high time for some new ones. They're in our Facebook group, Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound. That's the best way to find out what's coming up on the show, but there's a hell of a lot more. You get recaps of the day in music history, the ability to pitch questions to guests, polls that put you in the driver's seat on guest and band decisions, and access to a thriving creative hub if you're looking for a collaborator. So make sure you don't miss out. You can find the link to the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound Facebook page right there in the show notes. And if you don't mess with the Zuck, no sweat. Just email me at info@discograffiti.com and I'll keep you in the loop. So now that it's done and you want more, another way to dive even deeper into the greatest music ever made from the 1960s is to leap headfirst into my 12-hour interview with Jules Alexander and Terry Kirkman, the 2 founding members of Monterey Pop opening act The Association. That's episodes 110 to 113. Vashti Bunyan rating her entire catalog. That's 103 and 104. Os Mutantes Sergio Diaz on the early days of the band, that's 86 and 87. Burt Summer, 83 and 84. A tribute to David Crosby, that's 77 and 78. Lou Barlow rates the Zombies, that's 59 and 60. Bob Forrest on the band, that's 25 and 27. Monkees manager Andrew Sandoval rating the Monkees, that's 22 and 23. The Bee Gees' Psychedelic Beginnings, that's episode 10. And Sly and the Family Stone, episodes 5, 6, and 7. Join us during the upcoming week. This Sunday, you can expect another deliriously sociopathic entry of Rudy Fishman's Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast. These are real people with talent and a burning fire deep inside, just like you and I. Get to know your new music-obsessed friends. And of course, be sure to mark your calendars, because throughout the entirety of next week, we're coming at you with Metal Machine Music Week. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss it. And so, from now till then, don't let our youth go to waste, lads and ladies. It's Discograffiti.
Osiris.